17-year-old ex-delinquent Iguchi Tatsuya just got released from juvenile detention. In a new city, away from the influence of his old gang, he works hard in his aunt's restaurant on parole, reluctant to return to that hellhole of torture and trauma. But on a trip to the convenience store, Tatsuya finds himself in a familiar stare-down. His old habits grab a hold of him, and his entire being wills himself forward towards a fight he doesn't want to turn away from. Abe Kaname is the vice leader of a gang called Kalihito, and it's this behind the convenience store scuffle that leads Tatsuya to a new exciting life, one where he borders between proper rehabilitation and a violent delinquent world where everyone has taken a step out. Out is a delinquent manga based on a true story, the life of its author who the main character is named after. What I just told you is what happens in the first 2 chapters of the series, but also the real-life recollection of Iguchi Tatsuya when he was a minor. The manga is supposed to follow what occurred in his life as a young, prideful delinquent himself, and it feels just like that for the beginning of the story. The sweet bliss of adolescent freedom, friendship, and rebellion that delinquent manga are commonly known for, combined with Tatsuya's reluctance to dabble into anything truly nefarious. However, after befriending Kaname, Tatsuya becomes increasingly more entangled within the gang life of West Chiba, and more specifically surrounding everything that happens around Kalihito. And unlike any other delinquent manga I've read, Out uses its portrayal of delinquency to explore the brutal nature of adolescent violence and just how far out of normality these teenagers are willing to go. Out is a delinquent manga, yes, but it excels in being the most gruesome, horrible, and unsettling depiction of delinquent violence I've ever seen in the genre. Being published in a seinen magazine, Out has more creative control on what it can show and use in its serialization, from regular old bloody fistfights, the use of bats, swords, crossbows, guns, and even a goddamn spoon. From the recurring oblique kick that is spammed almost every fight, or the aftermath of incisions that display the person's literal guts falling out of their body, the artist Mizuta Makoto is given complete freedom over what is shown and how it's presented. But what makes this violence genuinely disturbing isn't just how far it goes, it's who it's happening to. Japan's Bosozoku gangs emerged post-war as adolescent biker groups, loud, territorial, and violent. With members as young as 16, they weren't criminal masterminds, but kids caught in cycles of rivalry that routinely escalated into abductions, torture, and death. For many, Bosozoku wasn't just a form of rebellion, but served as a pipeline into the Yakuza, and while Out rarely puts its characters on motorcycles, it inherits everything else about the subculture. Though Out is an extremely violent take on the genre, like most delinquent manga, there is no true main villain. There are no inhumane monsters, just a bunch of teenagers with warped priorities and broken moral compasses. Even the gang the story centers on isn't morally above the rest. The enemies are brutal, but Kalihito can be considered even worse in response. Everyone in this series is the same. Kids who ended up in the underworld only to find themselves stuck in a cycle of never-ending violence. In the middle of the city, a gang of Kalihito members back into each other while staring down their numerically advantaged bat-wielding opponents. In retaliation, they brandish their own weapons, all pulling out knives as they scream their heads off to scare the opponents, or perhaps scare themselves into thinking everything's going to be okay. So when you get a panel of a 17-year-old boy brandishing a shimmering knife as another person lays on the ground moaning in pain as he grips his thigh that blood won't stop flowing out from, you start to see a little bit more truth to the situation. Any altercation with a knife is a great way to prove how fragile human lives are and how willing you have to be to actually stab someone, and Out does such a great job at this. The knife wielder isn't joyous at his victory, instead he's stressing over his life being over, contemplating what he'll do when he gets sent to juvenile detention or prison, when all of a sudden, whacked in the back of the head, the knife wielder falls, his knees shaking, back contorted, eyes rolling up his face as his assailant trembles, celebrating his victory. But as the delinquent gets a closer look, staring at the foam beginning to bubble at his victim's mouth, in disbelief of his own actions, he crouches over and vomits in disgust. In the very same scene, another Kirihito member grabs a bat off the ground, swinging it full speed towards his opponent's head, who barely manages to dodge. Sawamura manages to dive and snap Ushima's leg with his bat, where we get to see his actual joint break and warp his skin, followed by Ushima, who has already lost coherence, crying as he grips his own leg in discomfort and pain. It's the expressions, the sudden cuts, and ever so terrifying reactions to each and every injury that make out such a violent and cutthroat manga. It doesn't try to glorify violence or make it seem like the characters are any stronger than they should be, instead focusing on the actual consequences that come with violent interactions like this. But this example was literally just fodder characters fighting, with nobody significant participating in the battle. What if we shifted our focus to the main player of the series, perhaps say our wonderful protagonist, Iguchi Tatsuya. Kirihito is in a guerrilla war against the Guevara brothers, three ruthless leaders known for their brutality towards both opponents and allies. Unfortunately, Tatsuya gets mixed up because of his friendship with Kaname and participates in a one-on-one match against the youngest brother, Shimahara Kenzo. This is the earliest major fight in the manga, showing the series' brutalistic nature and a taste of how good the fights will eventually be. It's not too drawn out, well choreographed, with a level of aggression that just edges on the side of extreme caution. You can tell the author has a certain level of martial arts experience, or at least understanding of how the human body works, with how his movements flow along as one coherent dance, sprinkled in with a little bit of manga madness. Though the fight is great, what matters is what happens towards the end of the battle. Tatsuya, against all odds, has managed to overpower Kenzo, and in a dazed-like state, he drifts over towards Kenzo's body, wrapping his hands around his neck as he uses all his remaining strength to choke the life out of his bloodied opponent. The fight is stopped before Tatsuya can actually finish him off, but in the aftermath of the battle, he's left shaking in fear, both of not wanting to fight that fucked up kid again, but also in the idea that he was so close to crossing the line. The shaking in his hands, his reluctant smile at winning is replaced by the dreaded feeling of the fact in which he could have become a murderer, and washed with the sense of relief that he didn't. The literal definition of out is to be away from the center of something. In this story, it can mean a lot of things. Tatsuya being an outsider to the city itself, a delinquent straying away from the conformity of society, or his separation from being an outsider of Kirihito while still being friends with Kaname. However, I think there's one specific instance of being out that most pertains to this video. That being the idea of leaving your humanity behind altogether and crossing the line from a regular teenage delinquent into a full-on killer. This line that's been carefully balanced and not fully crossed since the beginning portion of the series gets absolutely smeared and trampled on, with the coming of out's most grandeur and ferocious arc ever clustering all its major characters into a Nigerian mafia scrapyard where they fight with their lives on the line to prove their existence. The fights are on another level, both in brutality and illustration, but the major significant change is the loss of hesitation and the fact that almost everyone has crossed too far out to come back.
You're fresh and blood, flesh and blood.
Rakuzaki Kai is the brains of Kyoranki, Kirihito's rival group. He possesses zero fighting ability, is pushed around by the members of his own gang, and shakes like a crybaby when introduced to any sort of pressure. But underneath his anxious persona and out-of-place characteristics in Delinquency, he is a true and genuine monster. He has no qualms in bashing someone's head in with a rock while crying tears of joy, nor is there any hesitation in him when he pulls the trigger multiple times at people who can't fight back, but there's an even deeper twisted feeling in each and every one of his actions. Like the characters from before, he still has a sense of hesitation or morality in everything he does. After he blows a hole through someone's head, he will throw up in response at seeing their body hit the floor. He says he feels remorse for the lives he's indirectly taken, yet he continues to tread down his path anyways. You know how I said there's no characters that are just inhumane monsters? Well, this guy might be the only one I truly have no defense for because he is an actual villain through and through. This is most obvious and arguably the most brutal and sickening scene in the entire manga, the hostage Kai, who has captured 3 Kalihito members, offers them a chance to live if they play a game with him. A simple game where everyone takes a chode in their mouth, forming a tri-human Ouroboros, forced to bite as hard as they can off of his signal. The first 2 people to fully bite a chode off get to live, and the last placed person must perish. With 2 of them being tied up, the other one of them bleeding out, and Kai leisurely wielding a gun, they have no say in the matter, forced to either get gawking or simply give up. Kai stares at his former friend Taguchi, tears streaming out of his eyes as he savors the despair of a man who thought he could screw him over. One of the Kalihito members, Sho, rightfully refuses to participate, telling Kai to just get it over with as he apologizes to his 2 friends, and Kai raises the gun, letting a bullet fly. But the bullet never hits Sho. Kai, with impeccable aim that can shoot a moving can with perfect accuracy out of someone's hand from 10 meters away, blasts the guy who wasn't even talking just for the fucking fun of it. As Sho and Taguchi stare in disbelief at their friend who was just animated a few seconds ago, Kai, as a result of his own actions, proceeds to throw up what's left of his stomach, pick his gun up, and shout, "Come on, get to it! Dicks in mouths, now!" Kai isn't disturbing because of how far he goes, it's more so the fact that he willingly perpetuates himself across the line everyone else struggles with. He knows what he's doing is wrong, he mentally can't handle the stress that comes with killing another human being, yet he constantly does it, and his actions after he murders someone feel less like a real response and more of a fabricated reaction he creates to prove to himself that he's still a normal functioning person. Kai is important because he takes out hesitation around actions and just full throttle slams it into oblivion, erasing the line entirely where he can no longer tell where he himself even stands. And that's what makes this next fight so important, because Kaname and Miura aren't like Kai. They haven't reached past the line yet, and instead stand right on it. Before the war begins, Kaname's friend warns him that people they know will die, and as a result he will reach a point of no return. Kaname is someone who could live on the surface as a normal person. He's a delinquent who genuinely cares for both his friends and opponents. When he beat up the Guevara brother who tried to hit him in the head with a motorcycle and strangle him to death, he made sure his opponents made it to the hospital afterwards. He forgave opposing gang members who were spying on him and gave them an excuse to escape the wrath of his own gang. But it's his relationship with Kalihito's leader that binds Kaname to participate in this fight, and what entraps him into the mindset that he must take revenge. In a similar manner, Kaname's opponent isn't a bad guy. He's perfectly well and capable enough to go out and live in the regular world, unbound by any of his gang affiliations. But it's only in this violent-filled sector of society that Miura is drawn in, where he seeks something worth more than his own life. Both of them are tangled into this mess because of their past and current relationships, and it's not something they can back out of even if they wanted to. The fight itself is a peak of choreography in the series for me, from Kaname's onslaught of strikes to try and pin down Miura that repeatedly get blocked or evaded, with Miura only setting himself up and countering using Kaname's advances. Every move in their sequence of attacks is so well thought out, like Miura escaping from Kaname's rear naked choke by thrusting him into a pile of trash where he becomes impaled by an odd piece of scrap, or towards the end when Kaname uses the last of his strength to land a solid right punch, which Miura blocks with a rock, shattering Kaname's hand, but it was actually all set up for Kaname to step on Miura's foot so he could actually hit him with his left. Out fights start as well thought out exchanges, eventually devolving into a random onslaught of aggressive attacks emphasized by the blurry lines surrounding each swing and their rush of energy to try and assume victory. Kaname, whose right fist is broken and shattered with his bones sticking out, uses that broken fist of his and gouges Miura's right eye, piercing the pupil itself and whiplashing his head so hard his entire body shakes. Though this fight isn't the most violent or absurd, it is the one that distinguishes the lines that matter the most. Both Kaname and Miura are characters who have the potential to live outside of the world they are currently in, but instead of choosing to do so, they follow their peers and dive even further away from what they could have had. Out is one of the most memorable delinquent manga I've read, not because of how swagger the characters are, making me want to drop my life savings for a ring I'll never wear, or for how the story hasn't moved since I first picked it up years ago, but because of how brutally committed it is to its violence. A truly unique experience on delinquent lifestyles, committing to show violence as something that consumes the people inside of it. Through its increasing lethality and moral erosion, the manga explores all the different ways that its characters can descend away from a normal life. So, in Iguchi Tatsuya's violent-filled world, what does being out mean to you?